Okay, so next we have Sarah MOSOETSA, who's coming from Johannesburg. Sarah.
Thanks, Michael. The title of my talk is The Micropolitics of Poverty and Inequality. It is based on ongoing research in KwaZulu-Natal, a province in South Africa, and in Durban, and another province in Gauteng, closer to home, in 5 townships in Mamelodi, Atteridgeville, and Soshanguve. I think I should start by just giving the slide. Maybe I should stay in the dark. Okay. Maybe I should start with giving a visual representation of some of the townships that I'm talking about, and then get to the more substantive stuff that I want to say. This is an aerial view of Mpumalanga Township outside Durban. This is one of the houses and that I spent a lot of time in. In some ways, it feels like home. And many others. I think that's in Tlalagahle, and I think notice the back shack at the end of the back of the house. This is more Pretoria, Johannesburg side. That picture depicts one of the biggest, I think, challenges facing South Africa today. And it might not be visible, but at the center of this is a security guard a place, and at the center of it there's a note that says no vacancies, awukho umsebenzi. And maybe that's not even clear, and this is outside a textile factory in Durban. This is another one, I think, that textile, and I deliberately cut out the name of the factory. Again, it reads, no vacancies, we are not recruiting, awukho umsebenzi asiqashi. I think that's the context in which my stories and the narratives that I got from the many women and men that I spoke to in KwaZulu-Natal, and much more recently amongst youth who are unemployed in Gauteng, in Atteridgeville, Soshanguve, and Mamelodi. I think, like most people, I've also been arguing that there is a crisis in South Africa, and it's a crisis steeped in the ways that we have understood the post-apartheid dispensation, the post-apartheid era. And I think what I want to depict here is the brown house, my left, your right, or the blue house. Let's start with the blue house. The blue house is a crude example of what has been built in post-apartheid South Africa by a legitimate government, the ANC-led government, African National Congress, while the one on my left is a typical apartheid matchbox house. Let me say a couple of things, five to be precise. First, I think that there are continuities and discontinuities in the ways that we have understood the African household in the context of South Africa. That the history of dispossession does not start with the neoliberal agenda post-apartheid South Africa. That the crisis of the African household does not start with post-apartheid South Africa. Indeed, we know that it has new features. It's neoliberal, while during apartheid, we know that the history of dispossession was marked by cheap labor, migrant labor system, labor reserves, what we call Bantustans, forced removals, past laws, Immorality Act. With post-apartheid South Africa, of course, that all goes away. But I think what is important for me, and as I've been interacting with the men and women in South Africa, talking about their own crises of unemployment, poverty, and inequality, and indeed also of the burden of disease, is that the history of capitalism in South Africa, apartheid capitalism, post-apartheid capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, has always inflicted a crisis for the African household. indeed in a different guise today. But that's just context. I think what I want to know, and what I often wanted to know is, and the story that I have always wanted to know, and I continue to want to know, is who carries the burden of survival? Who has carried the burden of survival? Is it the market? Is it the lawn mill mine shaft in somewhere in Rustenburg in South Africa, or the Hebex textile factory? The answer is definitely no. It's not the market. It's not capital. Is it the state? I think the post-apartheid state has played an important role through its child grant and pension grant systems, through community employment schemes, free houses like the matchbox that you see there in blue. But that's half of the story. That's even 10% of the story. What I'm hearing from the many women and men that I talk to, young and old, is that the burden of survival is carried by individuals, in households, in communities. So here's the second point, that the argument here is that the household is becoming an important site of survival. Most people who are unemployed, retrenched from those textile industries, from lawn mill, have retreated back to the household. So in the household, there is cooperation, there is sharing of limited income, indeed of limited food, indeed, hence we talk about food insecurity. But there is that sharing of that food, and hence the notion of eating from one pot. There is indeed sharing of time, and the limited space, and hence the earlier picture. Second, or third, my Bantu education is letting me down here, I can't count. The crisis and the crisis and responses of poverty and unemployment, I want to argue, are reconfiguring gender identities and their struggles. In what way, you would ask? It is not everyone in that household. Let's open the hidden abode. Let's open the black box. It is not everyone in that household who shares that burden equally. It is older women who are becoming de facto heads of households. Continuities, discontinuities. It's similar to the apartheid era, where men would go to lawn mill to work, women will stay behind and take care of the household and become de facto heads of households. Why is it that we're retreating back to that mode? I thought modernity taught us that we're moving forward all the time. Why are we retreating? Men, however, it's important to talk about men. The Mr. Zulus, Mr. Tabekulus. Men, however, have developed feelings of shame and loss. And indeed loss of income, of a job. Right? But of power as well. It's amazing how one's identity as a man is shaped by a factory floor, a simple factory floor that was constructed many years ago, centuries. So the dominant narrative that I hear is, I lost my job, I lost my manhood, my wife does not respect me anymore. So that we have de facto heads of households, and before we start celebrating women and older women as finally assuming their rightful positions as heads of households, or even start feeling sorry for Mr. Tsebekulu or Mr. Zulu. Let me say a few things. The importance of older women in their households and communities has not resulted in the elevation of their status, but rather subordination and domination has found a new voice. that patriarchy in this context has ended. And before you kill me for saying this, let me explain. And many other feminists in the room, before you kill me. That patriarchy in the ways that we have understood it, patriarchy in the ways that we have defined it, has indeed ended. Instead, new forms of patriarchies have emerged, resurfaced, based on, and I underline, narrow and convenient definitions of culture and tradition. I am a Zulu man, and therefore, in my culture, I am the head of this household, and I take every decision that needs to be taken in this household. Narrow, convenient definitions of the Zulu culture, tradition. The consequences of all of this, unfortunately, has been escalating levels of domestic conflict, violence, and abuse. Let me go back to, so I'm sure you're getting traumatized now. Then maybe let's show that. That the crises and responses of poverty and unemployment have also led to something else, have led to particular generational, intergenerational struggles. That young women, unlike older women, their counterparts, the sisterhood, are challenging traditional notions of femininity and motherhood. They are challenging what it means to be a good woman, a good mother. They are refusing to take on responsibilities that their mothers have taken on. They thus find themselves in conflict with their mothers, indeed with their fathers, indeed with their brothers, and their boyfriends. Young men, and this is where the Gauteng story, I think, comes in and interesting. Young men, like their fathers, are experiencing feelings of shame, of powerlessness. But their shame and powerlessness is not because they've lost jobs, but precisely because they've never even had a job in any way. So, the dominant narrative from these young men, from Sifiso and Pule in Atteridgeville and Soshanguve, is that I am waiting for a job. I am waiting to become a man. At most, the consequences of this intergenerational or generational struggle is alcohol and drug abuse. In the wake of neoliberalism, marketization, hypercommodification, indeed the household is becoming an important site of survival. But it is a very fragile site of survival. Let me conclude with these few points. It is a depressing story, and most of you are looking at me and is it a story of powerlessness? Are these all victims of poverty, unemployment, drug abuse, domestic violence? No. Is Sifiso Ntombi, Mazulu, Mr. Zulu, all victims with no agency? I'll conclude with some glimmer of hope. What you see emerging in the various communities, be it Soshanguve in Gauteng, or another 6-hour drive, KZN Durban in Mpumalanga Township, are new forms of organizations, be they formal or informal, be they faith-based organizations or concerned citizen groups. Some of them, possibly, even showing signs of what most people have been talking about him, Polanyi's counter-movement, possibly. What connects all of these moments of citizenship, it is not income, because there's no income. It is not income, but political change or responding to their immediate needs, be they antiviral drugs, access to water, access to electricity, access to land, and access to housing. And one most important thing, wanting to get rid of corruption. The second last point is that most of these organizations, most of these informal, be they ephemeral as most of them are, have erupted, have always been, have come out in these communities in relation to the community protest, making demands not on Bar Americana, not on Lon Min or the textile factory, but on the state to deliver on its election promises. There are also, I'll help you out, Mark. There has also been symbolic but powerful expressions, the young people demanding accountability from the state. So here is what Pule would say to me. And these are interviews conducted just before our national elections earlier this year. He says to me, I'm angry, I don't have a job, the political party that I trusted has let me down. But voting is power. We are going to show them. Indeed, I'll conclude with this, indeed, the ruling party, the ANC, wins the elections in Gauteng, but drops by 10% from its previous elections. Thank you.